He's never pulled like this before, not once in 5 years. The leash burned in Jack Whitmore's hand. Ranger, the 8-year-old German shepherd who never broke stride, never disobeyed, was dragging him sideways across the beach like a dog possessed. His claws tore into wet sand, nose low, body tense, every muscle drawn tight as a bowstring. "Ranger!" Jack barked, voice sharper than the salt wind slicing off the Pacific. "Heel!" But the dog didn't so much as twitch. He kept pulling, growling low in his throat, eyes fixed ahead toward the fog-choked rocks near the cove, an area they'd never explored, an area Jack always avoided. The leash snapped taut, yanking Jack off balance. He stumbled forward, boots sinking in the saturated earth. He barely caught himself before face-planting in a shallow tide pool. Ranger let out a single bark short, cutting, then another. I didn't panic. It wasn't aggression, it was insistence. Jack narrowed his eyes, scanning the swirling grey curtain beyond. The morning fog was thick, even by Oregon standards, swallowing sea and sky alike. Out here, it felt like the world ended 20 feet in any direction. Only the steady roar of waves reminded him the ocean was still out there, somewhere. The dog pulled again. That's when the dread hit, not sudden, but a slow, coiling ache in his chest. Something was wrong. The kind of wrong that made the hairs on his neck rise. The kind that didn't come from logic, but from the leftover wiring war puts in a man. And Ranger felt it too. "He's never pulled like this before," Jack muttered under his breath. "Not once in 5 years." They'd walked this beach every day since Jack moved to Brookings, a routine tighter than boot camp. 5 years of silence, of trying to forget. Same boots, same stretch of sand, same damn fog. That's what kept the ghosts quiet. But now the routine was broken. And Jack knew when something breaks routine, it wakes things up. The cove revealed itself slowly, like a secret. Jagged rocks jutted from the earth like black teeth. Driftwood lay tangled with old netting. The wind here was different and dead still. Even the gulls seemed to avoid it. Ranger led Jack to the base of a wide boulder half covered in kelp. There, tangled in a mess of rope, barnacles and seaweed, was something metallic poking from the sand. The dog whined and began pawing at the mound furiously. "What is it, boy?" Jack asked, the first tremor in his voice cracking through. He dropped to his knees beside Ranger and pulled away the wet cords, revealing the full object, a dented aluminum canteen. Old, military issue, but not American. The shape was slimmer, with a longer neck. Jack's breath caught in his throat. He knew this design, South Vietnamese Army, ARVN. He hadn't seen one of these in decades, not since Hugh in 72. And yet, here it was, buried in Oregon sand. Jack reached out, fingers trembling. The metal was cold, scarred, corroded by salt and time, but that wasn't what stopped him. It was the carvings. Every inch of the canteen's surface had been etched deliberate, patient lines, scratched deep into the aluminum. Images. A village with palm trees. A woman holding a child. Soldiers. Smoke. Symbols. A story. Jack swallowed hard, throat dry as sandpaper. This wasn't just a relic. It was a message. From a ghost. That night, the storm hit. Not outside, inside. Jack sat in his dark cabin, the canteen resting on the oak table like a ticking bomb. The wood stove crackled, casting orange light on the walls. Ranger lay nearby, alert but quiet, eyes never leaving the metal object that had disrupted everything. Jack couldn't stop staring at it. His mind wouldn't let go. Why was it here? Who had carved it? Was the man who owned it still alive? Or was this some posthumous confession tossed into the ocean like a bottle message no one was ever supposed to find? He turned it over in his hands, heart pounding harder the longer he held it. There was something about it, some weight deeper than its physical mass, a presence, like whatever pain it held had seeped into the metal itself. He set it down, breathing heavy. 5 years. He had lived 5 years in this cabin without once having a flashback, without once thinking about that girl in hue, the one he didn't save. And now here he was, staring down a canteen that seemed to remember him. The next morning, Jack took the canteen outside and washed it with seawater. Ranger sat beside him as he worked, eyes sharp, like he was guarding something sacred. The tide rolled in and out in the background, pulling the sky into its rhythm. Jack scrubbed at the grime, revealing more carvings, more of the story. Near the base, he spotted something unusual, a faint seam, too clean to be corrosion. A trick seam, hidden. He twisted. The top loosened. He froze. Ranger leaned forward, ears perked. Jack twisted again, and the canteen's cap came off not at the neck, but halfway down the body. A compartment. Inside, wrapped in green parachute cloth, was a glass vial sealed tight with amber-colored wax. He held it up to the light. There was something inside. A scroll. His hands shook. Ranger whined. Jack didn't open it. Not yet. He stared at the vial for a long time that night. The canteen sat on the table like a wound reopened. He didn't sleep. His head was full of noise. Not sounds noise. Memories he'd buried. Places he'd locked up. The screams. The smoke. The girl's wide, terrified eyes as she reached for something, someone that never came. He hadn't thought of her in years. Now he couldn't not think of her. He needed help. Not just with the language, but with what this was. Why did it find him? There was only one person in this town who might have answers. A name he knew from local lectures and newspaper articles was someone who studied Vietnam long before it became history. Dr. Evelyn Monroe. He didn't know her, but he had to. Jack visits Dr. Evelyn Monroe with the canteen and its sealed message, hoping for translation. But what she uncovers is far more than words. It's a connection that stretches across oceans, decades, and guilt that refuses to drown. This isn't just metal. It's a memory carved in grief. Dr. Evelyn Monroe stood in the center of her cluttered study, glasses low on the bridge of her nose, fingers carefully tracing the carvings on the canteen Jack had placed before her. She didn't speak right away. The silence stretched, not uncomfortable, but weighty. Jack sat rigid in a wooden chair, hands clenched together. The cabin's fire crackled behind them, and Ranger lay at his feet, quiet and alert. Evelyn finally exhaled, the sound soft, almost reverent. "This is extraordinary," she said, her voice low. "I've seen ARVN gear before, but never something like this." "It's not just a canteen," Jack said, unable to hide the rasp in his throat. "There's something inside. A vial. A message, I think." Evelyn looked up, eyes narrowing with curiosity. "Have you opened it?" He shook his head. "Didn't feel like it was mine to open." She smiled faintly, appreciating the restraint. "You did the right thing bringing it here." Jack leaned forward, elbows on knees. "Can you read it? The carvings?" "Some," she said, picking up the canteen again. "The etchings tell a story. The artist, whoever he was, wasn't just passing time. He was remembering something, or trying not to forget." Jack felt something shift inside him. The words were too familiar. Evelyn continued, fingers moving across the metal surface as if reading Braille. "This isn't just metal, it's a memory carved in grief." Jack flinched. She glanced at him, reading the flicker in his face. "You knew people like this, didn't you?" Jack stared at the fire. "I didn't know them, not really, but I saw them. South Vietnamese soldiers. Some fought beside us, some we never even talked to, but they bled like we did." "Or worse," Evelyn added quietly. He nodded. "I was in Hue," he said, not looking at her. 72. Easter offensive. My unit was pushed north during the retreat. It was chaos. There was a girl. I don't know why I remember her more than anything else. He didn't say the rest. He didn't have to. Evelyn set the canteen gently on the table and reached for her reading glasses. Let's see what this soldier had to say. Unsealing the vial took time. The beeswax was old but hardened, nearly fused. Evelyn worked slowly, using a precision scalpel from her conservation kit. Jack watched her hands, steady and patient, as if she were performing surgery on something living. The cork finally popped free with a soft sigh, releasing a faint must of salt, dust, and old ink. She tapped the vial gently, and a tightly rolled scroll of paper slid into her palm. Parachute silk kept the moisture out, she said, almost to herself. This is in remarkable shape. She laid it flat on archival paper, pressing the edges gently. The Vietnamese script was fluid, beautiful even to Jack, who couldn't understand a word. But Evelyn could. She began reading silently. Her eyes scanned left to right, her brow furrowed deeper with each line. Occasionally she'd whisper a phrase to herself. Jack sat still, afraid to interrupt the unspoken ceremony happening in front of him. Then she paused. Her finger hovered just above the bottom of the page. 2 words. She looked up at Jack. You were right, he already knew. Forgive me. She nodded slowly. That phrase is not common in Vietnamese endings, she added. He added it in English, like he wanted someone else to understand it, someone who couldn't read the rest. Jack swallowed. What does the rest say? Evelyn took a deep breath. He identifies himself. Sergeant Phan Min An, IRVN. He wrote this in 1984. Says he's lived in Oregon for 30 years. Started a new life, had a family. But he never left Hugh. Not in his mind. Jack stared, stunned. Oregon? She nodded. He says he brought the canteen here. Crafted it with his own hands, carving the story in pieces over years. He describes a retreat from Hugh. Says he saw a woman and her child trapped in a ditch. The little girl was dying of thirst. He had a full canteen. Jack's chest tightened. He started toward them, but his commanding officer shouted to fall back. Enemy fire was closing in. He hesitated, just a second. His men pulled him away. The last thing he saw were her eyes. Jack closed his own eyes. It could have been the same girl, could have been another. War made everything bleed together. But the guilt, that was always personal. Evelyn folded her hands. He wrote that he couldn't forget. Every time he held the canteen, he remembered her. That it became a symbol not just of his failure, but of every memory the world tried to wash away. Jack stared at the object. It sat there quietly, reflecting the firelight like it was listening. He came here, Jack said. To this coast, not far from where I found it. Yes, Evelyn confirmed. He writes, I stand on the shore of the same sea that touches my homeland. I give this to the ocean. If someone finds it, maybe they'll understand. Maybe they'll remember too. Jack didn't speak. The fire crackled behind him. Ranger exhaled heavily at his feet. Did he say anything about family? Jack asked finally. Evelyn reached for a notepad. He mentions his daughter. Doesn't name her. Says she was born here. That she never knew his past. That he didn't want her to. Jack sat back, stunned. He lived here. In this state. Portland, Evelyn said. That's where he passed. I did a quick search earlier when I saw the ARVN mark. There's only one obituary in that time frame that matches. He died just months after writing this. Natural causes? Heart attack. Jack looked down at his hands. They were steady now. But he didn't feel calm. He felt exposed, like someone had read his own story aloud. You said his daughter's alive? He asked. I have a contact, Evelyn said, at the Vietnamese American Cultural Center in Portland. I'll reach out, quietly. We won't push. Jack nodded, but something had already started moving inside him. For years he'd buried that part of himself in routines and silence. Now a stranger had carved a mirror in aluminum and tossed it into the sea, and the tide had brought it straight to his feet. That wasn't an accident. He didn't know what he owed Sergeant Anne, but he knew he owed something. That night, Jack sat with the canteen in his lap. Ranger rested beside him, warm and solid. Outside, the wind howled, stirring the sea beyond the glass. He didn't dream of war. He dreamed of a little girl standing in the surf, holding out an empty canteen. Jack prepares to meet Annie Nguyen, the daughter of Sergeant Anne. But how do you return a piece of someone's buried past, especially when it was never meant to be found? This is my father's soul, and it came back to me in your hands. Annie Nguyen stood in the doorway of the Vietnamese Cultural Center in northeast Portland, arms folded tight across her chest. She was younger than Jack expected, maybe late 30s, with a calm, composed presence. Her hair was pulled back in a loose bun, and she wore no makeup. Just clear eyes and a guarded stillness that said she'd had enough surprises in life. Jack stood across from her, the canteen tucked under his arm, wrapped in a faded flannel shirt. Ranger waited patiently outside the door, tied to a nearby post, tail swishing once every few seconds. Annie spoke first. "You're the man who found it?" Jack nodded. "By accident," he said quietly. "Or something like it." She stepped aside, letting him into the center. The air inside was warm and smelled faintly of incense and old paper. Glass cases lined the walls, photos of refugees, maps of migration, old uniforms, family altars, black and white wedding portraits. Jack followed her down a quiet hallway into a small private meeting room. No windows, just a table, 2 chairs, and a kettle on a warmer in the corner. She gestured to the chair. "Sit, please. Would you like tea?" He hesitated. "Sure." She poured carefully, wordlessly, like every movement had been rehearsed 1,000 times. When she sat across from him, her eyes finally settled on the bundle in his lap. "Can I see it?" Jack hesitated. Then he unwrapped the canteen. He didn't place it on the table. He handed it to her directly. Annie took it with both hands, like something sacred. As her fingers traced the worn carvings, her breath caught, not loud, but sharp enough that Jack noticed. She turned it slowly, absorbing every line, every scar. And when she spoke, it wasn't to Jack, it was to the canteen. A whisper. "Cha." Jack blinked. "You recognize it?" She nodded without looking up. "He kept it on a shelf in our garage, for years. I thought it was just some old army thing he couldn't throw away. He never let me touch it." Her fingers paused on one of the carvings of the woman holding the child. "He carved at night," she added. "When I was a kid, after my mum passed, he started doing it more. I'd hear the scraping, the rhythm. It used to scare me." She finally looked at Jack. There were tears in her eyes, but her voice was steady. "This is my father's soul," she said, "and it came back to me in your hands." Jack's throat tightened. He didn't know what to say. Words always failed at the edge of things like grief, history, guilt. All of it is too heavy for language. "I didn't know he'd thrown it in the ocean," she said, more to herself than him. Jack nodded slowly. "He said in his letter that he wanted it to go home, that the ocean touched both shores." Annie's lips curled into the faintest smile. "He always said poetic things like that, especially when he drank." She ran her fingers along the side of the canteen again. "He used to tell me stories about a little girl. Said she haunted his dreams. I thought he was just being dramatic." Jack looked down. His hands trembled slightly in his lap. "I saw her too," he said, barely above a whisper. Annie blinked. "In Hugh, 1972, there was a moment I froze. We were pulling out, and she was there, small, maybe 6. I was carrying too much gear. She looked right at me, and I turned away. He looked up, his eyes glassy but unflinching. I never forgave myself. Annie didn't respond right away. She studied him the way someone might study a scar, something healed, but still ugly. My father spent the last 20 years writing letters he never sent, she said quietly. To people who died, to God, to the girl. He said if he ever saw her again, he'd hand her this canteen himself. She traced one final groove in the metal. But maybe this is close enough. Silence settled between them, not cold, just real. Then Annie looked at Jack again, her voice softer now. Why did you come here? I didn't want to carry it alone, he said. I thought maybe it belonged with you. Her eyes welled up again. She nodded, then gently placed the canteen on the table between them. I think he wanted us to meet, she said. I think he wanted you to forgive yourself too. Jack almost laughed, but it came out as a broken sigh. I don't think I deserve that. Neither did he, she replied, but it didn't stop him from hoping someone would offer it. They drank tea in silence for a while after that. No words, no need for them, just the canteen on the table and two people trying to stitch a story back together from what war had torn apart. Before Jack left, Annie stopped him at the door. I don't know what you believe, she said, but if there's any chance my father can hear this, I'd like you to say something to him. Jack tilted his head, confused. Out loud, she clarified. You're the one who found it. Maybe you're the one who should say goodbye. He looked down at the canteen, now safely tucked back into her arms. He cleared his throat. Sergeant Anne, you were braver than most. You didn't turn away. Not in the end. I found what you left behind. And I'll carry what I need to carry. Annie nodded, holding the canteen to her chest. Then Jack added, voice firm this time, and I won't let her be forgotten. Outside, Ranger wagged his tail as Jack approached. The clouds had shifted slightly, letting pale afternoon light scatter through the trees. Something in the air felt lighter. Jack reached down and scratched behind Ranger's ears. Good boy, he murmured. Guess we're not done yet. He opened the truck door. Ranger jumped in. Jack paused, one foot on the step. There was still something unfinished, something tangled in the roots of his memory, buried deep. Tom Delgado. He hadn't spoken to him in years, but Tom had been there, in Hugh, in that street, at that moment, and maybe, just maybe, he remembered the girl too. Jack heads into the mountains of Montana to confront his old squadmate, Tom Delgado. But unearthing the truth means digging into the kind of memory both men have spent their lives trying to outrun. We left her there, Jack. You and I both. The cabin was hard to find. Tucked deep into the pines north of Missoula, Montana, it didn't show up on GPS. Jack had only a half-remembered postal route and a name scratched on an old Christmas card from '99. No return address, just a few shaky words. Still breathing. Hope you are too. Signed, Tom. Jack parked his truck beside a rusted Ford with one flat tire and stepped out into silence. Snow clung to the edges of the trees, stubborn despite the spring melt. The air smelled like pine, old wood, and fire smoke. Ranger hopped out beside him, ears perked, alert but not aggressive. Jack trusted the dog's judgment more than his own, most days. The cabin looked abandoned until the front door creaked open. A figure stepped out, tall, lean, with a thick white beard and long, unkempt hair tied back in a rubber band. He wore a faded green army jacket over thermals and jeans and held a rifle loosely in one hand. Not aimed, just visible. Tom Delgado stared at Jack like he was a ghost. Then he let out a dry chuckle. Well, I'll be damned. Jack took off his hat. You're a hard man to find. Tom grunted. That's the idea. The silence stretched between them like barbed wire. Then Tom lowered the rifle and waved him in. Inside, the place smelled of tobacco, dust, and something cooking in a slow cooker that had probably been on for 3 days. Old photographs lined the mantel, some of Tom in uniform, some of people Jack didn't recognize. A few looked like they might have been taken in Vietnam, if you squinted through the grain. They sat at a battered kitchen table. Tom poured 2 fingers of bourbon into tin mugs and pushed one toward Jack without a word. Jack took a sip. It burned. I felt honest. Tom lit a cigarette with a shaking hand. "So, are you here to tell me you finally kicked the ghosts?" Jack stared at the table. "No, I think I found one of yours." Tom raised an eyebrow. "Is that so?" Jack reached into his coat and pulled out the photo one Evelyn had printed for him, a scan of the carving on the canteen, the girl and her mother etched in aching detail, their faces burned into aluminum. Tom looked at it for a long time. Too long. The hand holding the cigarette began to tremble. He put it down in the ashtray without taking a drag. "Where'd you get this?" Jack told him. The beach, the dog, the message inside, Sergeant Fan Min An, the confession, the guilt. He didn't embellish. He didn't need to. When he was done, Tom leaned back in his chair and stared out the window at the trees. "I remember her," he said finally. Voice quiet, raw. Jack's chest tightened. Tom went on. "She was maybe 5, 6. We were pulling out of that sector. The whole block lit up. Buildings on fire. Smoke so thick you couldn't tell what was sky and what was hell." He took a shaky breath. "She was standing in the middle of the road. No shoes. Holding a plastic bottle like it was a treasure." Jack's voice came rough. "I saw her too." Tom looked at him, something sharp behind his eyes. "I know you did," he said. "We both froze." Jack felt the air leave his lungs. "I thought it was just me." Tom laughed bitterly, humorlessly. "Hell no. You think I've been living in the woods for 20 years because I like squirrels?" Silence fell again. This time, it didn't cut it. "We left her there, Jack," Tom said, the words slow and deliberate. "You and me both." Jack closed his eyes. He remembered the girl, the red dress, the way she looked at him, the scream that never left his ears. Tom's voice broke the stillness. "I dream about her more than I ever dreamed about firefights, more than the ambushes, more than the dead we knew by name." He looked back at the photo. "I thought maybe I made her up, a guilt mirage." "No," Jack said. "She was real." They sat for a long time, neither speaking. Ranger rested his head on Jack's boot. Eventually, Tom reached for his bourbon and downed the rest. "I used to write her letters," he said, "like some idiot. Told her I was sorry. Told her what I wished I'd done. I'd burn them in the fire. Figured maybe the smoke would reach wherever she ended up." Jack felt something shift in him. No guilt it never left, but a strange kind of warmth, like maybe this was what truth sounded like when spoken aloud by someone else. "I think someone else wrote her too," Jack said. "Sergeant Ann, the man who carved that canteen." Tom nodded slowly. "Good. She deserved more than silence." Jack finished his bourbon. His voice steadied. "I want to do something with it. With the canteen. Not bury it, not hoard it. I gave it to his daughter, but I don't think it ends there." Tom leaned forward. "You're thinking, what museum? Memorial?" "Something," Jack said. "Something that doesn't let her be forgotten." "That doesn't let any of them be." Tom tapped ash into the tray. "You're not going to fix the war." "I know." "But maybe," Tom said, eyes meeting his, "you can fix yourself." Jack stood to leave as the sun dipped behind the trees. The cabin was already slipping into darkness. Tom walked him to the door. "You're not staying?" Jack shook his head. "Too much road left." Tom looked out at the horizon. You find peace out there, Jack. You let me know. I might still want some. Jack offered a small smile. Only if you come down from the mountain someday. Tom chuckled. Not likely, but who knows? Maybe the ghosts'll let me. Back in the truck, Jack sat for a moment before starting the engine. Ranger leaned over from the passenger seat and licked his wrist once, gently. Jack looked out at the cabin one last time. He wasn't alone in what he carried. That didn't make it lighter, but it made it shareable. He didn't go straight back to Oregon. Instead, he took the long way home. Stopped in little towns, watched the landscape stretch and bend around his thoughts. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the girl's face, but now there was more around her. A carved canteen, a father's letter, a daughter's silence was broken, and a man in the woods who remembered too much. By the time he pulled back into his driveway, the coastal sky was thick with storm clouds. Rain started to fall. Ranger barked once and bolted toward the porch. Jack followed, but something caught his eye on the step. A note. Folded, dry under the awning. He opened it. Cass. 2 words, written in ink. Come in. As a storm rolls in, Jack confronts his deepest fears alone in his cabin. But some ghosts don't scream. They whisper, and Jack is about to hear them louder than ever before. You're still in the war, Jack, and it's winning. The rain hit the cabin like artillery. Wind howled through the trees, bending them to near breaking. The windows rattled in their frames. Jack sat at the edge of his bed, boots still on, shirt damp, staring at the floorboards like they held answers he'd missed for decades. Ranger paced the room. He never paced. Jack rubbed his temples. The note from Cass lay on the nightstand. 2 simple words. Come in. But Jack hadn't gone to the cafe. He couldn't. Not tonight. The storm outside was just weather. The storm inside is different. It started as a tightness in his chest. Then the buzz. Not sound. Just pressure. Like a chopper spinning up on the edge of memory. His lungs forgot how to pull air. His throat forgot how to swallow. He stood, trying to shake it off. I walked to the kitchen, opened a cabinet. I closed it, opened another. All the motions of living are pointless. The Ranger barked sharply. Jack spun. Nothing, just a flash of lightning behind the window. His reflection looked back at him like a stranger. He dropped into the old armchair by the fire. The canteen wasn't here anymore. It was in Portland, in Annie's hands, but its absence screamed louder than its presence ever had. Because now the memories had nowhere to hide. He closed his eyes, and the war came. Hue, smoke, screaming, radio static. Jack ran through a street choked with dust and bodies. Gunfire rattled around him like angry gods slamming doors. A man's voice yelled something, orders, a warning, he didn't know. Then, the girl, same one, red dress, standing in the middle of the road, holding a plastic bottle, feet bare and bleeding. She looked up at him, eyes too old for her face. Jack stopped. Everything stopped. She held the bottle toward him like it was sacred, like he was... His hand twitched toward the canteen strapped to his belt. The shouting. Delgado screamed, "Move! Jack, move!" A shell hit behind him. The force threw him forward. When he looked back, she was gone. Jack snapped awake in the chair, gasping. The fire had gone out. The cabin was dark, but the girl's eyes stayed with him. He rubbed his face hard, as if he could scrub the memory out of his skin. He stood, dizzy. I walked to the window. Fog pressed against the glass like breath. The world beyond was pale and shapeless, just like the day he found the canteen. A knock. Sharp. He froze. Another knock. Then a voice. "Jack?" Cass. He exhaled, suddenly aware of how cold his hands were. He opened the door. Cass stood there soaked in rain, her hoodie pulled up, jeans muddy. She held a thermos in one hand, a brown paper bag in the other. "You weren't at the cafe," she said, as if that explained everything. "I wasn't in good company today," he replied. She stepped inside without waiting for permission. "I brought chili and whiskey. Which do you need more?" Jack closed the door behind her. "Yes." She handed him the bag and the thermos, then peeled off her wet hoodie and hung it near the stove. Ranger trotted over and leaned against her leg. Cass scratched behind his ears. "Even your dog looks worried." Jack gave a dry laugh, opened the thermos, poured a little into 2 mugs. The smell of chili filled the room as he unwrapped the bag. They sat at the table. She didn't say anything at first, just let the quiet hold. Finally, she spoke. "You look like you haven't slept in days." "I haven't." "You want to talk about it?" "No." She nodded, sipped her drink, looked at the fire, then back at him. "Then I will," she said. Jack raised an eyebrow. Cass leaned forward, elbows on the table. "You walk that beach every morning like it owes you something. You don't talk to anyone. You barely talk to me. But then you find something out there, whatever it was, and suddenly you're unraveling like a man trying to climb back into a dream he never woke up from." Jack looked away. She didn't stop. "I see it in your eyes, Jack." "You're still in the war, and it's winning." The words hit harder than they should have. He stared at the thermos like it was going to explode. She softened. "You think hiding up here in the trees is peace, but it's just silence. And silence isn't healing. It's delay." Jack exhaled. "I don't know how to come back." "Start small," she said. "Come back to a moment, not the whole war, just one thing." He hesitated, then spoke. "There was a girl in Hugh. She needed help. I didn't help." Cass didn't interrupt. "I saw her, just for a second, but she saw me. She asked without words, and I froze. I've been trying to make sense of that second ever since." Cass leaned back in her chair. "Did you make that second happen?" "No." "Can you unmake it now?" Jack closed his eyes. "No." "Then you've got 2 choices," she said. "Carry it alone or share the weight." He opened his eyes. She wasn't offering therapy. She was offering a presence. "The kind of lifeline you don't get twice." He nodded slowly. "Thanks for the chili." She smiled. "Don't thank me yet. It might kill you." They sat quietly after that, letting the storm do the talking. Later, after she left, Jack stood at the window watching the fog roll off the cliffs. It no longer looked like something hiding what he feared. It looked like something waiting. He walked to the shelf, pulled down a dusty journal. The cover cracked when he opened it. Blank pages. He stared for a long time. Then he picked up a pen. First line. "Hugh, 1972. The moment I remember most wasn't the gunfire. It was the eyes of a child who didn't cry." The words came slowly, but they came, and for the first time in decades, Jack began to speak, not out loud, but in ink. Cass invites Jack into the warmth of her world, a cafe, a conversation, and the kind of quiet that doesn't demand, only listens. And Jack begins to understand that some healing begins in ordinary places, over coffee, with people who stay. Sometimes the quiet places know exactly what you're not saying. The bell above the door let out a soft jingle as Jack stepped into Cass's cafe for the first time in what felt like years, though it had only been weeks. The smell of roasted coffee beans and warm bread wrapped around him like a blanket. Outside, the rain had finally eased, but inside, everything still held the hush that followed a storm. Ranger padded in behind him, his nails clicking on the old hardwood floor. He paused, looked up at Jack as if asking permission. Jack nodded. The dog wandered to his usual corner near the fireplace and curled up without fanfare. Cass stood behind the counter, wiping down a steel pitcher. Her eyes flicked up, and a smile pulled at her mouth, not wide, not loud, just real. "Well, look who finally found the front door," she said. Jack gave a small nod. "Thought I'd trade ocean fog for a little steam." Cass pointed to a small table near the window, the one with the best view of the cliffs beyond the trees. "Sit. I'll bring you something that doesn't taste like regret and instant coffee." He chuckled, surprising himself. As he settled into the chair, he looked around the space. It wasn't large. A dozen tables, mismatched chairs, the kind of lighting that made everything look like a painting. Shelves lined with local books, old cameras, hand-thrown mugs. Nothing felt mass-produced. It was warm in the way old songs were warm, unrushed. Cass arrived with a dark roast in a chipped blue mug and a plate of warm cinnamon bread. She sat down across from him, no apron, no rush. He took a sip. It was rich, smooth, and way too good for how little he'd slept. "I don't know what you put in this," he said, "but I feel like I owe it an apology." Cass smirked. "It's just coffee." "You're the one who's different." Jack looked out the window. The cliffs beyond the trees were still slick with rain, but sunlight now cracked through the clouds. "I wrote something," he said after a pause. Cass leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Yeah? First time in years." She didn't say anything, just let him sit in it. Jack pulled a small notebook from his coat. He didn't open it, just hold it. "I started with the girl, the one from Hugh." Cass's voice was soft. "Did it help?" "I don't know. Maybe it felt like bleeding with a pen. That's writing." He nodded. For a while, they sat in the quiet. The cafe began to fill. A couple came in, early retirees from town. A young girl in a college hoodie settled at the bar, earbuds in. Cass waved at them all, but didn't leave the table. "I've been thinking about the canteen," Jack said, "and Anne's daughter, and Tom, and me. It's like we're all carrying the same scar, just in different languages." Cass looked at him. "So speak it, however it comes." He tapped the notebook. "I'm thinking maybe it doesn't end with returning it to her." "Are you thinking about the museum again?" He nodded. "Or something like it. Not glass cases, not marble plaques. Just a space where things get to be seen, where guilt becomes memory, and memory becomes something we can survive on." Cass leaned back, folding her arms. "Sounds like a mission," Jack smirked. "I always hated missions." "But you always finish them," she countered. He looked up at her, really looked. This cafe, this woman, this table, they weren't just pit stops. They were part of the story too, the part where silence met sanctuary. "Why this place?" he asked. "You could have opened a cafe anywhere." Cass looked around, thoughtful. "My dad was stationed at Fort Lewis. After he died, my mum and I bounced around. But this coast, it felt like him. Solid, quiet, still listening." She gave a soft laugh. "Sometimes the quiet places know exactly what you're not saying." Jack nodded, absorbing that. He understood it now. Places don't just hold people. They hold their echoes. An hour passed. Then 2. Jack read her the opening lines from his journal. Cass didn't flinch, didn't fill the silence with pity or validation. She just listened. And when he was done, she said, "That girl, you didn't forget her. That counts." "I'm not sure it's enough," Jack said. "No," Cass replied, "but maybe it's the start of enough." That evening, as the sun lowered beyond the cliffs, Jack stood on the porch of the cafe with Ranger by his side. Cass locked up behind him. He turned to her. "I've got a friend in Portland, Evelyn, historian. She helped me translate Anne's message. She knows people who could help archive this, not just the canteen, the story." "Do you trust her?" Cass asked. "I do." "Then call her." Jack paused. I want you to come too. Cass raised an eyebrow. I mean it, he said. You're part of this now. She looked at him for a long moment. Then, all right, soldier, but I don't ride shotgun unless I pick the playlist. Jack smiled. Deal. That night, he wrote again. This time, not about the war. He wrote about cinnamon bread and chipped mugs and the woman who didn't ask him to bleed for her but handed him a towel when he did. With Cass at his side, Jack returns to Evelyn in Portland. But when they examine the canteen under ultraviolet light, something new emerges. An invisible map, a final clue that suggests Sergeant Anne had more to reveal and more to ask. The truth doesn't just live in words, it hides in what we're too afraid to see. Evelyn's office at the Vietnamese Cultural Center smelled like old paper, jasmine tea, and something vaguely metallic, probably from the boxes of rusted artifacts stacked along the back wall. Jack hadn't been here in over a month, but everything looked the same. Shelves packed with books. Military patches pinned like puzzle pieces across a corkboard, a globe that hadn't spun in years, except now Cass was with him. She stood beside Jack, scanning the room with quiet curiosity, her eyes sharp but patient. She didn't say much, and didn't have to. Her presence grounded him, kept the weight of the past from pressing too hard on his shoulders. Evelyn adjusted her glasses and gestured to the table where the canteen sat, sealed in a protective, archival case. I still can't believe the condition this thing's in, she said, unlocking the case with a small brass key. Unused aircraft-grade aluminum, not standard issue. This was custom, handmade. Cass leaned forward slightly. Like a confession you can't burn. Evelyn looked up at her, surprised, then nodded. Exactly. Jack watched her lift the canteen gently, then set it on a velvet cloth under a ring of high-powered UV lights. I've been meaning to test this for weeks, she said. Most people don't realize that a lot of South Vietnamese soldiers used ultraviolet reactive ink during the war, especially for hidden communication, smuggling maps, marking escape routes, invisible to the naked eye. She flipped a switch. The lights buzzed to life. At first, nothing. Then, slowly, under the black light's glow, faint blue lines began to appear along the bottom edge of the canteen, thin, jagged, deliberate. Cass leaned in. That's a map. Jack squinted. Is that the Central Highlands? Evelyn nodded, already pulling a transparency overlay from her drawer. She placed it over the glowing pattern, aligning the shapes. Yes, but not just any region, she said. These coordinates, this is near A Loi, just west of Hue, right along the old Ho Chi Minh Trail. Jack felt his throat tighten. That was Anne's battalion's last recorded position before they vanished during the retreat, Evelyn added. The official reports say they were overrun by PAVN forces. But Anne survived, somehow. Cass's voice was soft. Maybe this isn't a map for escape. Maybe it's a grave. Evelyn looked at her. It's possible. The Vietnamese have a word. Mo Gyo Wind Tombs. Symbolic graves for soldiers lost in battle with no body to bury. Jack stared at the glowing lines. They seemed to pulse under the UV light like veins. He didn't want the truth to vanish, he said. Evelyn nodded. The truth doesn't just live in words, it hides in what we're too afraid to see. She turned off the UV light. The map disappeared like a ghost. Jack looked over at Cass. Her eyes were distant, locked on the canteen even after the glow faded. This changes everything, she said. He wasn't just carving his story. He was leaving directions. Evelyn tapped the table. Whatever's out there, bones, memories, something worse, you don't go in unprepared. That terrain's unstable. Old war zones aren't friendly to tourists. Jack's voice came quiet but certain. I'm not a tourist, Cass crossed her arms, and you're not going alone. Jack glanced at her, surprised. She met his eyes without hesitation. "You think I came this far to drop you at the gate? If we're going to chase ghosts, we do it together." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "I assume you're both vaccinated, geared up, and have passports?" Jack gave a faint grin. "I've got one. Haven't used it since '83. Cass smiled. "I've got frequent flyer miles and a knack for charming customs agents." Evelyn handed Jack a printed copy of the coordinates. "This won't be easy, but if Anne left this for someone to find, it wasn't a mistake." Jack pocketed the map. "Do you think he wanted his daughter to know?" Cass asked Evelyn. Evelyn shook her head. "If he did, he'd have told her. He wanted someone like you to find it, someone with the same ghosts." Jack absorbed that in silence. He wasn't being punished by the past. He was being tasked by it. That night, back in Portland, Jack and Cass sat at a riverside bar overlooking the Willamette. Neon signs reflected off the water like old memories, beautiful, a little broken. Jack stared out at the lights. "I don't know what we'll find there," he said. "I'm not sure I want to." Cass stirred her drink. "Closure isn't about answers. It's about facing the question without flinching." Jack turned to her. "And if the trail leads to nothing?" She shrugged. "Then we leave something behind. A marker, a name, a piece of truth." He nodded slowly. "That map, it's not just coordinates. It's an invitation to finish what got buried." Cass raised her glass. "Then let's dig." Jack and Cass travel to Vietnam, following Anne's hidden map into the jungle of Aloy. But the deeper they go, the more Jack realizes some ghosts don't want to be found, and some truths refuse to stay buried. In this place, silence isn't empty, it's haunted. The heat was a living thing. Dense, wet, almost sentient. Jack stepped off the narrow trail, boots sinking slightly into soft earth, and stared out at the green wall of the Aloy jungle. This wasn't the Vietnam of his memories of bombed cities and cracked pavement. This was older, wilder. It had swallowed entire units during the war, and now it was about to give up one of its secrets. Cass walked beside him, sweat darkening the back of her shirt. She didn't complain, just kept scanning the tree line with careful eyes. Behind them, their guide, an older Vietnamese man named Bao, walked in silence, machete in hand, parting vines with gentle swings. He had been recommended by Evelyn's network and hadn't asked many questions when Jack showed him the map. They'd flown into Hue 3 days ago, spent one night in the city, walking the ghost streets, visiting the outer edge of the Imperial City where Jack once hid under mortar fire. Cass had stayed close, letting the silence do the talking. He was grateful for it. Now they were here, halfway up a ridge that didn't exist on any modern map. Jack checked the coordinates again, compass trembling slightly in his hand. "Another quarter mile," he said, voice low. Cass nodded. "You okay?" He didn't answer right away. Then, "It smells the same." Cass raised an eyebrow. "The jungle. After rain. The mix of rot and life. Gun oil and wet canvas. Memory has a scent," she nodded. "So does grief." Bao raised a hand suddenly. Stopped. They followed his gaze. Just ahead, hidden beneath a tangle of vines, was a cluster of rusted metal, barely visible but unmistakable. A corner of what looked like a collapsed shelter, bent rebar, shards of a steel helmet, and beside it, poking up from the dirt like the finger of a buried god. A bone. Jack didn't breathe. He stepped forward slowly, each movement careful, reverent. The jungle around them hushed. No birds, no wind, just the hum of unseen things. Cass knelt beside the bone. Brushed away soil with her gloved hand. It was clean. Too clean. "Recent landslide," Bao said, finally breaking his silence. "This ground shifts every year. Maybe last monsoon brought this to the surface." Jack nodded, his voice hollow. "This is it." This is where Anne's unit died. Cass stood and turned slowly in place. But he survived. And he marked it, Jack added. He wanted someone to know. Maybe not to remember the war, but to remember them. They spent the next hour in quiet work, clearing vines, photographing what they could. Bao found more fragments of dog tags with numbers too corroded to read, part of a rotted rifle stock, a boot half swallowed by roots. Jack unearthed a medallion of a Catholic saint pitted with rust. He closed his hand around it, and wasn't just carrying guilt, he was carrying graves. Cass didn't speak, just stood a few steps away, her eyes scanning the jungle. "What are you thinking?" Jack asked. She replied without looking at him. "In this place, silence isn't empty, it's haunted." The words hung in the air, heavier than the humidity. By sunset, they'd set up a small camp a few hundred feet from the site. Bao prepared a simple meal: rice, dried fish, water purified over a small flame. Jack sat by the fire, the medallion still in his pocket. He hadn't told Bao or Cass, but he recognized the saint. It was the same one carved on the canteen. He looked up at the jungle again, shadows curling like fingers through the trees. "I should have died here," he said suddenly. Cass glanced at him, startled. "In 72, we got caught in a valley not far from here. Air support didn't show. We were outnumbered. I crawled under a dead body to stay hidden. Heard the VC walk right past me." Cass didn't interrupt. "Sometimes," Jack continued, "I wonder if I did die, and the rest has just been aftershocks." Cass moved beside him, sat down. "You're not dead, Jack." "How do you know?" "Because you came back." "And not everyone does." They sat in silence, listening to the jungle breathe around them. Later that night, Jack couldn't sleep. The fire had burned down to embers. Bao snored quietly nearby. Cass had zipped herself into her tent, only her boots visible in the lantern glow. Jack stood and wandered back toward the site. The moon broke through the canopy in thin shafts, lighting the earth like an altar. He knelt. Not to dig, just to be still. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the medallion. "I found it," he whispered. "I brought someone." He didn't know who he was talking to: Anne, the girl, himself, maybe all of them. He placed the medallion on a flat stone, then pulled out a folded photo one Annie had given him before he left. Her father, young, smiling, arms around a woman and a little girl. He placed it beside the medallion. A wind moved through the trees, soft and sudden. Jack felt it move through him too. At dawn, they broke camp. Bao wrapped the site in cloth tape, marked coordinates, and took photos for local authorities. Jack would submit everything to the Vietnamese Veterans Archive back in Hue. Evelyn had already prepared the paperwork. Before they left, Cass placed a small carved stone at the center of the gravesite. She didn't say what it meant, just set it there with quiet care. As they descended the ridge, Jack turned back once. "I see you," he whispered. "We all do now." Back in Oregon, Jack's return brings no peace. Someone has broken into his cabin, the canteen is gone, and all signs point to a man Jack had buried in memory: Clay Croft, a name he hoped he'd never hear again. "You thought the war ended because they stopped shooting some of us." Rain traced silver lines down the window pane, tapping like fingers too impatient to knock. Jack stood in the doorway of his cabin, the smell of damp wood and broken trust heavy in the air. The front door was splintered, pried open, not kicked. Clean, methodical, not vandalism, a message. Cass moved past him slowly, scanning the living room. Drawers pulled, couch cushions overturned, books strewn across the floor like they'd been judged and discarded. "Someone was looking for something," she muttered. Jack already knew what. He crossed to the shelf where he'd last kept the archival print of the Canteen photo, the UV map tucked behind it, out of sight. Gone. The journal he'd started ripped in half, pages torn, scattered. And one more thing. Ranger's water bowl was dry. But Ranger was there shaking slightly in the corner, unharmed but unsettled. Cass kneeled and held him close. "Easy, boy. Easy." Jack clenched his fists. "This wasn't random." "No," she agreed. "This was surgical." He walked to the desk, opened the bottom drawer, reached beneath the false bottom and felt air. Gone. The original Canteen. Whoever it was had known exactly what to look for. That night they sat in silence while the rain continued its quiet war outside. Jack poured a shot of whiskey, but didn't drink it. Cass leaned against the fireplace. "Do you think it's her?" "Annie? No," he said. She barely wanted to hold it. She was grieving, not greedy. Cass nodded slowly. "Then who?" Jack stared into the flames, and a name half-muttered, half-remembered rose like bile. "Croft." Cass furrowed her brow. "Who's Croft?" Jack didn't answer at first. Instead, he walked to the cabinet in the back of the cabin, the one he hadn't opened in years. Inside were the remnants of his military file, photos, maps, letters from people long dead. At the bottom, a torn page from an unofficial report, unmarked, unfiled. He dropped it on the table. Cass picked it up, read aloud. "Operation Bitter Grass, April 1972. Civilian contact unresolved. Secondary unit intervention, Sarged, Clay Croft. Orders exceeded. Inquiry halted." She looked up. "What the hell is this?" "The girl," Jack said quietly. "The one in hue." Cass went still. She wasn't just collateral damage. We weren't the only unit in the sector. Croft's team came in after ours. He was different. He paused, voice hollow. Some men saw war as a duty. Croft saw it as permission. Cass stared at him. "You think he's still alive?" "Oh, he's alive," Jack said. "That man's too bitter to rot." He paced, adrenaline rising. "I never reported him. I should have, but I was too messed up. Too afraid they'd rope me in, too. Evelyn once said Croft went private after the war. Black contracts, arms smuggling, disinformation works in South America." "And now he's back?" Cass asked. Jack nodded. "And he wants what Anne left behind." "Why now?" "Because I lit the signal flare," Jack said bitterly. "By giving the Canteen to Annie, by talking to Evelyn, by chasing this trail, I stirred the dirt. And Croft, he's the kind of man who watches graves to see who still cares." The next morning, Jack called Evelyn. She answered on the third ring. Tired, cautious. "Jack?" "They hit the cabin. Took everything." Silence. "Canteen?" she asked. "Gone. I warned you." "You knew Croft might be alive," he accused. "I didn't know, Jack. I feared. Croft never officially existed after 74. No records, no death certificate. Just whispers. I need help. You'll get it," she said. "But understand this. If Croft wants that Canteen, it's not nostalgia. It's leverage. Someone's willing to pay for the last untold story of the war, and in the wrong hands, that story becomes a weapon." Cass leaned in close to the speaker. "What kind of weapon?" "The kind that rewrites history," Evelyn said, "that turns guilt into justification." Jack felt his jaw tighten. "We can't let that happen." "Then you need to find him first," Evelyn replied. "I know where to start." Later, Jack opened a map of the Pacific Northwest and pointed to a stretch of coast near the old Fort Stevens ruins, a place where Cold War bunkers still crumbled beneath moss and memory. "Croft ran black ops through this region in the 80s, Jack said. "There's an old radar station buried in the hills. Shut down in '89. Locals say someone still lives there. Cass studied the map. And you think that someone is him? I know it is. She looked up. Then we go. Jack shook his head. Not we. Me? She stood. Jack. I can't put you in that crossfire. You already did. They locked eyes for a long moment. He saw her stubbornness, her anger, her heart. She saw his fear not for himself, but for her. Cass stepped back. Fine, you go. But if I don't hear from you in 24 hours, I will bring the whole damn town. Jack allowed himself a faint smile. Deal. Before leaving, he knelt beside Ranger. Stay with her. Watch her back. The dog licked his hand once, solemn. As Jack stepped out into the morning fog, shotgun in hand, boots steady on the wet earth, he felt something he hadn't felt in years, not guilt, not rage, purpose, because Croft thought this was still a battlefield, and Jack was about to show him that memory could be just as deadly as any bullet. In the shadows of the Oregon coast, Jack tracks Croft to an abandoned military bunker. But what he finds beneath the ruins is not just a man, it's a shrine to forgotten sins, and Croft is ready for war. The past isn't buried, it's loaded, locked, and aimed right at you. Jack stood at the edge of the forest, mist curling around the trees like smoke from an old fire that refused to die. The wind off the Pacific carried the tang of salt and rust. Ahead, half hidden beneath layers of moss and bramble, lay the entrance to the old Cold War radar station. Fort Stevens had been decommissioned decades ago. Officially, it was just another forgotten ruin on the Oregon coast. But Jack remembered something different. In the early '80s, he'd heard rumors of men who never came back from training exercises in these woods, black site whispers, places where truth went to die. Now, one of those ghosts had built a throne here. Jack stepped forward, shotgun cradled in his arms, every sense on high alert. The metal door was ajar, not a trap, an invitation. He entered. Inside, the air turned cold and damp. Concrete walls bore the scars of age-peeling paint, exposed rebar, water stains like blood smears. A single bulb flickered down the corridor. Further in, yellowed maps clung to the walls, curling at the edges. Someone had been living here. Preparing. He passed a table stacked with VHS tapes. War footage, labeled with dates and coordinates. A rusted file cabinet hung open clippings of military scandals, redacted reports, and photos of American soldiers with eyes scratched out in ink. Jack's heart pounded not from fear, but from recognition. This was more than survival. It was obsession. Then came the sound. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. He turned, leveling the shotgun. From the shadows stepped a man, taller than Jack remembered, thinner, but the eyes were the same, sharp, sunken, and full of quiet hate. "Jack," Croft said, as if greeting an old hunting dog. "You aged like guilt," Jack replied. Croft grinned, teeth yellow, face half lit by the flickering bulb. "And you came all this way for a canteen?" Jack's finger stayed near the trigger. "Where is it?" Croft tilted his head. "You still think this is about metal and memory? That little bottle with its secrets?" "I think it's about the men you left behind," Jack said. "And the ones you buried so deep you thought the jungle would forget." Croft walked past him casually, circling like a shark. "The jungle forgets nothing. Neither do I. That's why I kept the relic." He paused at a small steel locker. I opened it. Inside sat the canteen carefully cleaned, set upright like it belonged on an altar. I could have melted it down, sold the map, sold the name, Croft said. But I didn't. I kept it, because I knew one day Someone like you would come crawling back to pay for the sins we all agreed to forget. Jack's jaw clenched. No one agreed. You silenced them. Croft slammed the locker shut. They were cowards, weak men with soft hands and softer minds. They didn't see what we were building. Jack took a step forward. What were you building, Clay? A legacy of ghosts? Croft's voice dropped to a hiss. A world where war meant something, where we weren't ashamed of what we did to win. Jack raised the shotgun slightly. You didn't win anything. You just stopped killing long enough for the headlines to change. Croft laughed. You think truth wins wars? No, truth ends them. And sometimes too early. They stared at each other in the dim corridor, two halves of a country's conscience. Then Croft pulled something from his coat, a tape recorder. He clicked it on. Jack heard his own voice. From Vietnam. A radio log. His voice gives coordinates. Calling in fire on a village. Croft played it for 5 seconds, then clicked it off. I've got more, he said. Dozens of tapes. Yours, the others, names, places. Enough to rewrite every pretty little story in every museum in the West. Jack didn't flinch. You're bluffing, Croft smirked. Try me. Jack lowered the shotgun slightly, not in surrender, but in calculation. What do you want? Croft moved to a desk, placed the recorder down. I want you to admit it, that we were the same. That we did what we had to do, and no one's clean. Jack took a slow breath. Then, I am guilty of surviving, of staying silent. But you. He stepped forward, barrel raised again. You were never silent. You celebrated it. Croft's smile broke for the first time, just a crack. Then came the sound of a hammer clicking. Cass, standing behind Croft with Jack's sidearm steady and deadly calm. Croft stiffened. You brought her? Like you said, Jack said. Someone like me was always going to come. Cass moved in closer. Step away from the tapes. Croft didn't, so Jack fired, not at Croft, at the recorder. The shot blasted it into shards, metal and tape spilling like blood. Croft screamed, not in pain, but fury. Cass grabbed the canteen from the locker while Jack kept the shotgun trained. We're done here, Jack said. Croft stepped forward. This isn't over. Jack stared at him. It is for you. They exited into the daylight, silence heavy between them. Cass finally spoke. He had more, didn't he? Jack nodded. But he won't share it now. Not with the world. Not with anyone. And the canteen? Jack took it from her hands. It felt different now. Not just a relic, a survivor. With Croft in the wind and the canteen recovered, Jack and Cass must decide, expose the last truth of Anne's message or bury it forever. But the cost of silence may be higher than either of them is willing to pay. Some truths don't want to be told, but that doesn't mean they shouldn't be heard. The boat pushed quietly across the surface of the Columbia River, its wake fanning behind like a scar through still water. Morning fog clung low, obscuring the distant shoreline, muffling every sound except the quiet hum of the engine and the occasional cry of a heron overhead. Jack sat at the bow, the canteen resting on his lap like a weight he couldn't shake. Not physical, moral, emotional, ghostly. His fingers traced the engraved ridges again, the symbols now more familiar than foreign Anne's initials. A soldier's prayer in Vietnamese, and just below it, the faded map that had led them all the way to Aloy. He turned slightly, watching Cass at the helm. She looked forward, focused, jaw set, one hand steady on the throttle. Her knuckles were pale, her mind clearly somewhere deeper than the water below. Jack spoke first. He'll disappear now. Croft? She asked, not turning. Jack nodded. He's a relic. Men like him don't last forever. But what he carried, What he tried to sell, that poison, lives longer than bullets. Cass didn't answer for a moment. Then, and what about what we carry? Jack looked down again. That's the question, isn't it? He reached into his coat and pulled out a sealed envelope. It bore Annie's name in his own handwriting. Inside were the photos they took at the burial site in Vietnam, a scan of Anne's final message, and a translated copy of the UV map the truth laid bare as respectfully as he knew how. I couldn't hand this to her before, Jack said. I was afraid of what it would do to her memories. Cass looked at him finally. And now? Now I know it's not about her father. It's about her. She deserves to know, Cass said gently. She does, Jack agreed. But it'll hurt. Some truths don't want to be told, she said. But that doesn't mean they shouldn't be heard. Jack exhaled, long and quiet. They reached a small dock tucked beneath a cliff facing a forgotten pier used mostly by local fishermen. Jack stepped off first, offering Cass a hand. She took it. The cultural centre loomed just uphill. Inside, Evelyn waited. They didn't speak much during the walk. The air was heavy with decisions, with the weight of too many stories dying to be told and the fear of what telling them might unleash. Evelyn met them at the door, her expression guarded but expectant. She led them into the back room, where she'd set up a private archive space. Photographs, testimonies, digital screens, and shelves of military history, both American and Vietnamese. Jack handed her the envelope. Evelyn accepted it without a word. She opened it slowly, scanning the contents. You found it, she whispered. He nodded. And it was real? As real as war ever is. She moved to the table and laid the documents flat, smoothing them out like sacred pages. Cass stepped beside her. There's more. Croft had tapes. Records. Not just Jack, but others. We destroyed the worst of it, but it proves what Anne wrote about the betrayal, the cover-up. It wasn't just one man's guilt. It was systematic. Evelyn's hands trembled slightly as she traced the lines on the copied map. This could ignite everything. Or bury it deeper, Jack said, depending on who sees it. She looked up at him, eyes steady. What do you want to do with it? Jack hesitated. He thought about the weight of all the lives lost, the silence endured, the names erased. He thought of Anne, dying alone but still desperate to leave a message behind. And of Annie, living decades without knowing what her father endured or who he really was in the end. He thought of himself, too, of all the things he'd buried. I want it told, he said finally, but not weaponized, not turned into another excuse for blame or blood. I want it preserved, as a memory, as a warning. Cass added, and I want the Vietnamese families to know, the ones who never got graves, never got answers. Evelyn nodded. I can publish excerpts, frame it around Anne's story, protect your names. Give Annie the choice to speak if she wants. Jack ran a hand through his hair. Then we start there. They spent the next few hours digitizing files, recording statements, uploading evidence to encrypted servers. Evelyn moved like someone who'd trained for this moment her whole life, focused, purposeful. At one point she paused, holding up the canteen under soft museum lighting. Do you want to keep this? She asked Jack. He stared at it. It didn't look like much anymore, but he knew what it carried. No, he said. It belongs to the ones who never came home. Cass glanced at him. So do you. Jack gave a half smile. Some days. Evelyn placed the canteen in a new display case beside a photo of Anne in uniform and a printed translation of his final message. Beneath it, on a small placard, she typed, "This is not a relic. This is a voice." That night, Jack stood alone by the river again, tossing pebbles into the current. Cass joined him quietly. "It's almost done," he said. "No," she replied. "It's just beginning." He smiled at that. "Are you sticking around?" She looked up at the stars. "I don't think I've ever belonged anywhere more than I do right here." He offered his arm. She took it. The final chapter unfolds as Annie visits the cultural centre to face her father's legacy, and Jack is confronted by an unexpected letter that forces him to make one last choice: forgive himself or stay lost in memory forever. The museum was quiet that morning. Early sun filtered through the tall windows, casting soft rectangles of light across the floor. The scent of old wood and clean paper lingered in the air, mixed faintly with fresh incense from the altar in the corner, burned daily for the unnamed, the unburied. Jack stood beside Evelyn as she unlocked the display case for the final time. The canteen sat perfectly centered now, surrounded by context photographs of Anne, faded letters, a laminated translation of his final confession. Beneath all of it, a simple brass plaque. Some stories survive because someone finally chooses to listen. Annie arrived just after 10. She moved with careful, uncertain steps, her eyes scanning the room, pausing only when they found Jack's. He didn't smile. He didn't speak. Just gave her a small nod and stepped back so she could approach the case. She stood there for a long while, silent, still, until tears began to gather in the corners of her eyes. She didn't wipe them. She let them fall. This is him," she said softly. "Yes," Jack replied, "and it's yours now." Annie turned to him, blinking through tears. "Why did he leave this behind? Why not just come home?" Jack hesitated. "Because," he said, "he didn't think he deserved home. Some men carry the war back in their pockets. Others bury it so deep they forget who they were before it started." She reached out, brushing her fingers lightly across the edge of the case. "I hated him for so long," she whispered. "For leaving. For not saying goodbye." "He never stopped loving you," Jack said. "I saw it. I felt it. In every line he carved." Annie looked up at him. "Do you think he found peace?" Jack's voice was quiet. "I think he found you, even if it took 50 years. She let out a shaky breath, then stepped back. Cass was waiting by the doorway, giving them space. Jack walked to her side. "Well?" she asked. Jack glanced back at Annie, still staring at the canteen. "She's stronger than she knows. Maybe she got that from him. Or maybe she got that in spite of him." Cass smiled faintly. "Both can be true." They left the museum together, walking into the crisp fall air, leaves scattered along the sidewalks, crunching beneath their boots. Downtown Astoria was waking up, cafes opening, dogs being walked, the river shimmering just beyond the hills. Jack stopped at a bench overlooking the water and sat down. Cass joined him. For a long moment neither spoke. Then Jack pulled something from his jacket pocket. A letter. The envelope was old, yellowed, addressed to him in handwriting he hadn't seen in decades. He turned it over. "Found it in an old storage locker last week," Evelyn had told him. "Don't ask how it got there." He opened it slowly, fingers shaking more than he wanted them to. It was from Sergeant Tom Riley, his best friend in the war. Killed in action 2 weeks after Anne's unit disappeared. The letter was dated April 1972. He read it aloud to Cass. "Jack, if you're reading this, I didn't make it. That's all right. We all knew what we signed up for, but you've always had more to carry, more questions, more ghosts. I hope you're not letting them eat you alive. Remember the girl in Hugh? The one we couldn't save? I saw it destroy you, even though you tried to hide it. But what you did, what you tried to do, it mattered, even if no one ever knew. You don't have to spend your life buried with us. Live. Forgive. And if you can't forget, then at least make the remembering count. Love you, brother, Tom. Jack folded the letter carefully, slid it back into the envelope, and exhaled. Cass reached over, took his hand. What now? She asked. He looked out at the river. Now, we stop surviving and start living. They sat there a while longer, watching as a small group of kids tossed stones into the water. One of the boys picked up a flat rock and skipped it across the surface 5 perfect bounces before it sank. Jack smiled. I used to think everything sank eventually, he said. But maybe some things leave ripples. Cass leaned on his shoulder. Maybe that's all legacy is, she said. Ripples in someone else's calm. He didn't answer. Just watched the river and let it move through him. A week later, a special exhibit opened at the Vietnamese Cultural Center, a small space, just one case. But every day, someone new stopped to look. Veterans, immigrants, sons, daughters, people who had never known war but knew loss. They read Anne's letter, touched the glass, stood in silence. One little boy asked his mother, "Why did he write it?" His mother knelt beside him and whispered something Jack couldn't hear, but the boy nodded solemnly, and when he stood again, he saluted. In the end, it wasn't just about the canteen, it was about the truth inside it, the kind that isn't carved in metal but in memory, the kind that survives if someone's brave enough to carry it. And now, finally, someone was.